And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to continue learning about constructors. We're going to dive right in with constructor definitions. So let's get started. Often we want to initialize variables for an object when we create the object. A constructor is a special type of method that is designed to perform such an initialization. Now, we've actually already been using constructors. So, for example, in our last class, we had date 6 try. Date 6 try, date 1 equals new date 6 try. And you've seen this kind of thing already. Like, for example, if I did a scanner object, scanner keyboard equals new system, scanner that in. It's a similar kind of process. Now, the expression new date 6 try is an invocation of a constructor. Now, a constructor must have the same name as a class. So the first occurrence of date 6 try is the class name, and the second, the constructor. If you add no constructor definitions to your class, then what Java will do is it'll automatically create a constructor that takes no arguments. Now, up to now, these are the type of constructors we're doing. Though, one thing to note, it is preferable to define our own constructors so we can have them initialize the instance variables or other initialization actions. Alright, let's talk about overloading. In the class materials, you'll find the date class. And we've used the overloading technique to create 5 constructors for the class, and it's normal to have more than one constructor. So let me just go over here quick. Here's my date.java, and in here you can see we have these new instances in here for constructor methods. Right? These are all new here, because these are all the stuff we've seen before, like set date, all the stuff we've seen before. But here's our new ones in here. Right? So when I look at these, we have some new constructor methods. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. So this is public date, and you notice that this has no parameters. Right? This is kind of our default constructor right here. Here's another constructor method right here, which you notice takes an int, an int, and an int. We have another constructor, which is going to take a string, an int, an int. And we also have one that just takes a year. Then, of course, you also have this one down here, which also acts as just taking a instance of another date. So it's a date, as long as a date is not null, because otherwise it's not a real date. It will do setting of those date, month, and year. Otherwise, it crashes the program. So, going back to our notes here, you'll notice that because every constructor must have the same name in class, all the constructors in the class must have the same name. So when we define multiple constructors, we use overloading. If we look at here, we can see they are all called public date. Right? That is the overloaded method there. We have, again, multiple occurrences of that. So let's talk a little more about constructors. When we're defining them, you do not want to give any return type for the constructor. Notice they don't say void and they don't have a return. Right? It's because they are constructor methods. So we don't use void, as I just already mentioned. And they are normally public. Very rarely would you ever want to make them private. Generally speaking, these are public because you want to be able to access them outside of your class. Alright, initialization in our constructor definitions in the date class, all the instance variables are initialized, even though there's no parameter corresponding to the variable. So let me just flip back real quick here, and you can see that in here, those values are initialized. See, we have them right here. Set date, set date, set date. So we're setting an initial value down here. We're setting initial values in here for these variables. So for example, public date right here is handling a lot of that. So it's set to January 1st, 1000. You can do almost anything in a constructor method that you would do in a normal method. However, we normally only perform initialization tasks. So we're normally only going to use it to initialize the variable to a value. Now, with constructor arguments, when we create a new object with the new operator, we must always include the name of the constructor after the operator, new. This is the way you invoke a constructor. As with any method invocation, you list any arguments in the parentheses after the constructor name, which is the same as the class name. So, for example, creating a new object of the date class. Date birthday equals new date, parentheses, quote, December, quote, comma 16, comma 1770. This is a call to the constructor class, date, that takes 3 arguments, 1 string, 2 ints. This creates a new object to represent the date December 16th, 1770, and it'll set the variable birthday so that it names this new object. Let's talk about resetting those object values now. A constructor is called when you create a new object, such as with the operator new. Any attempt to call a constructor otherwise is illegal as shown below. Birthday.date, quote, January, quote, 27, 1756, that's an illegal invocation. Because you cannot call a constructor for an object that after it's created, you need some other way to change the values of the instance variables of an object. That is the purpose of the setDate methods and other methods that begin with set. So for example, birthday.setDate, quote, January, quote, 27, 1756. Although it's not required, the methods that set instance variables are normally given the prefix set. And if you look at our code, we have that here. SetDate, SetDate, SetDate. Right? So that's a good way to kind of relate that to what we're talking about here. Now, let's continue with this because you cannot reset the instance variable or created object. You can do something that's kind of similar. So in this example, I have birthday equals new date, quote, December, quote, 16, 1770. And then on the next line is birthday equals new date, quote, January, quote, comma, 27, comma, 1756. Now, the only problem here is that the second invocation does not simply change the values of instance variables for that object. Instead, what is it doing actually is it's discarding the old object altogether. So it's taking the old birthday that's stored in memory and throwing it away and then creating a new object called birthday. So it allocates storage for the new object before setting all the instance variables again. Therefore, it's better and more efficient to use methods such as setDate, which just simply changes the data of the instance variables of an already defined object. Because otherwise, what the program has to do is to take the data there, has to throw it away, and then has to reallocate all the resources in memory. So it's a lot less efficient. All right, quick tip on invoking another method in a constructor. It is perfectly legal to invoke another method within the definition of a constructor. This is because the first action taken by a constructor is to automatically create an object with instance variables. You do not need to write any code, though, to create this object. Java will create it automatically when the constructor definition has this object as the calling object. You can even include an invocation of one constructor within the definition of another constructor. We're not going to talk about this now. We're going to talk about that much later on in a different chapter. So kind of just file this away as a future reference. All right, a constructor which has the this parameter. Constructors, just like any other methods, can have the this parameter. The this parameter can be used explicitly, but is more often understood to be present, although not written down. Whenever an instance variable of the class is used in the constructor without an object name have a dot before it, it is understood to have an implicit this and dot before it. Similarly, whenever a method is used in constructor, the method has no explicit calling object, methods are understood to have this and a dot before it. The first action taken by a constructor object is to automatically create an object with instance variables. This object is automatically plugged in then for the this parameter. All right. One of our last things here include a no argument constructor. A constructor that takes no arguments is called a no argument constructor or a no arg constructor. Notice this term right in here, arg. Right, that's very similar with our main class. We always see the term args. That's kind of what this is coming from, is the term argument. If you define a class and include absolutely no constructors of any kind, then a no argument constructor is automatically created. This no argument constructor does not do much, but it does give you an object of the class type. So, for example, my class, my object equals new my class. Include a no argument constructor continues by saying that if your class definition includes one or more constructors of any kind, then no constructor is generated automatically. For example, suppose you define a class called your class. If you include one or more constructors that take one or more arguments, but do not include a no argument constructor in your class definition, then there is not a no argument constructor, and the following would be considered legal. Your class, your object, equals new, your class. The problem is that the above declaration asks the compiler to invoke the no argument constructor, but there is not a no argument constructor present. So, in order to avoid issues, you should normally include a no argument constructor in any class you define. If you do not want the no argument constructor to initialize any instance variables, you can simply give it to an empty body where there's no code inside of your curly brackets. So, for example, public class, and then just don't do anything. And it just does nothing. Now, a no-argument constructor is known as a default constructor. However, this term is misleading because a no-argument constructor will not always be provided by default. As such, we often use the term no-argument constructor instead. And that concludes our notes for today, folks. Until next time.